my wish, if it's a deep, sincere wish that's coming from my heart, behind it is a divine wish.
Hello and welcome to Nameless. Evolution Begins Within, a magazine-style podcast bridging science, mysticism, and the human experience. Thank you for joining us. I'm Julia Rocco, and joining me is our co-host, Amin Dadi. For this episode, our topic is sincere intention. As with most interesting and worthy subjects, it's been explored and discussed for the millennia. But in this time of the Great Shift, we ask, what does sincere intention feel like in one's body, in one's breath, and more specifically, in one's heart space? What does sincere intention mean to you? In our science section, I'll define sincerity and intention. Then we'll discuss a study that we found on the National Library of Medicine site entitled Electrophysiological Evidence of Intuition. And then I'll expose the 400-year-old lie revealed in a Harvard Business Review article. We'll also hear a clip from Dr. Joe Dispenza, who explains repeating patterns and asks us to notice our own patterns and what our intent, or maybe lack of intent, is behind our actions. Are you stuck in what Dr. Joe Dispenza calls the operating system? In the segment, If Not Now, When? Conversations with Alice Wyatt, a hard day turns positive when Alice takes a much-needed step to clear her mind and rejuvenate her soul. Though your circumstances may be different, we all need to learn what it takes to bring back balance into our lives. And now, here is our co-host, Amin Dadi.
Thanks, Julie. Following up with the science of how our mind and brain interact, we're continuing our discussion with Hassan Gebel, the astrophysicist turned counseling psychologist, who brings a unique perspective and some practical instruction on how to achieve your sincere intention in life. In short, how can we develop a relationship with our deepest selves to become our own guiding light? In our segment called Listening In, is a perfect example of how sincere intention to help humanity has been aided by regular practice. This has resulted in some 2,500 dreams over about 8 years. The one for this episode is about bringing inner into outer, a deep dive into the difficulty and importance of this process, if a change in perspective, and thereby a change in the world we live in, is to occur.
Before we begin, we invite you to take what intrigues you and leave the rest. Our faithful guide in life is our felt sense. When we ask ourselves, how does experiencing this information or situation feel? We easily find our answer. If it doesn't feel right, drop it, move on. It's not meant for you. The same goes for content on our episodes. Some concepts will resonate and feel good, sparking something on the inner planes, while other information may be confusing or not ring true. In those cases, simply leave it behind. We are in a world of the great unknown, where the human eye perceives less than 1% of all available light. So we ask you, how much can really be known when we cannot see 99% of what's in front of us? That's why we believe the key to life is asking the question, how does this feel in my heart? So before we get into this episode any further, let's actually define sincere. So sincere is an adjective, which means free from pretense or deceit, proceeding from genuine feelings. Sincerity is a virtue of one who communicates and acts in accordance with the entirety of their feelings, beliefs, thoughts, and desires in a manner that is honest and genuine. So that's kind of a mix-up of Wikipedia and Merriam-Webster's definition of sincere or sincerity. So intent is defined as a thing intended, an aim or a plan. So a better way to describe it in similar words would be a purpose, an objective, a goal, a target, a wish, desire, ambition, ideas, dreams, aspirations, and most of all, hope is what we would define as intention. So here's a definition from our own Sufi scientist, Murshid Inayat Khan, who says, "The first step is sincere intention. Without sincere intention, there is no deliberate creative power. Wishful thinking is not enough. One must have focused intention and utter certitude of the result. In order to bring the intention into being, one must have the ability. Then one must take appropriate action. In all deliberate creative acts, these three same elements are required: sincere intention, adequate ability, and appropriate action." So the first article I'm going to discuss is Electrophysiological Evidence of Intuition. So this is a part 2 of a system-wide process. So this work was actually done at the Heart Math Research Center in Boulder Creek, California. And we're just going to go through the objectives, a little bit of the design, the results, and then the overall conclusion of what they found in this experiment. So they really had two objectives. One was to extend the results that they had found in the previous experiment, was that the body demonstrated that it can respond to an emotional arousing stimulus seconds before it actually experiences it. So that's pretty interesting. And the second objective was to figure out a theory or develop a theory that explains how the body receives, remember we're receiving units, and processes information involved in intuitive perception. So how the design worked was this: they got 26 participants, and what they did was they had 30 calm images and 15 emotionally arousing images. And what they did was they had the participants push a button, the screen was blank for 6 seconds, and then an image popped up for 3 seconds, and then the screen went blank again. And in that time, they looked at the EEGs and the ERPs and the EKGs, and even the HBEP, which is the heartbeat evoked potentials, were derived. So what they found was that, surprisingly, both the heart and the brain appeared to receive and respond to the intuitive information. And even more surprisingly, there is compelling evidence that the heart appears to receive intuitive information before the brain. There was also significant differences in pre-stimulus ERPs for calm images versus emotional stimuli. And the frontal cortex, temporal, occipital, and other areas appeared to be involved in the process of pre-stimulus information. Especially noteworthy is the apparent interaction between the heartbeat evoked potentials and the event-related potentials in females, which suggests that the heart modulates the event-related potentials and that females are more attuned to intuitive information from the heart. So in conclusion, overall the data suggests that the heart and brain together are involved in receiving, processing, and decoding intuitive information. The article goes on to say, on the basis of these results and those of other research, it would thus appear that intuitive perception is a system-wide process in which both the heart and the brain, possibly other bodily systems, play a critical role. So in this article I found on the Harvard Business Review website called The Power of Intent, it has a lot of different ideas that it brings up. But one of the main things is that people can tell your perceived intention right away. And it has nothing to do with what you're saying or doing. It's just they can feel your intent. So even though you might want to know and get feedback from fellow colleagues or your employers, the question you have to ask yourself deep inside, are you ready to hear critical feedback and do anything about it? And if you're not, then don't even put the question out there, because people can tell your intent and your sincerity of the question. So the author goes on to talk about this really amazing story that I wanted to share with you around rituals in some parts of Africa, where when a mother conceives, she writes a song for her child and sings it to her child while it's in the womb all throughout pregnancy. And when the child is born, the village comes together to sing that same song for the child. So now anytime that baby cries, the mother sings that song to comfort him or her. So when the child grows older and the mother has to return to the fields or leave for work and leave the infant at home, even though she may be out of earshot of if that baby is crying, she will sing that song to soothe her child. And incredibly, as it may seem, the child seems to sense her mother's intent and stops crying. That's the power of intent. And in a book from 2007, The Intention Experiment explored the science of intention, drawing on findings of leading scientists from around the world. Author Lynn McTaggart uses cutting-edge research conducted at Princeton, MIT, Stanford, and other university labs to reveal that intent is capable of profoundly affecting our lives in all aspects. In the book, William A. Tiller, a professor emeritus at Stanford University, argues, for the last 400 years, an unstated assumption of science is that human intent cannot affect what we call physical reality. Our experimental research of the past decade shows that, for today's world, and under the right conditions, this assumption is no longer correct. Obviously, our thoughts, our feelings, our intentions, if they're sincere or not, are definitely felt. Do some little experiments in your own life. Be intent on something, and then be wishy-washy and see how it works out. So here's Dr. Joe Dispenza to explain what a habit is and to give us some things to consider in our own daily rituals.
Well, a habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. A habit is when you've done something so many times that your body now knows how to do it better than your mind. So if you think about it, people wake up in the morning, they begin to think about their problems. Those problems are circuits of memories in the brain. Each one of those memories are connected to people and things at certain times and places. And if the brain is a record of the past, the moment they start their day, they're already thinking in the past. Each one of those memories has an emotion. Emotions are the end product of past experiences. So the moment they recall those memories of their problems, they all of a sudden feel unhappy, they feel sad, they feel pain. Now, how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So the person's entire state of being when they start their day is in the past. So what does that mean? The familiar past will sooner or later be predictable future. So if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny, and you can't think greater than how you feel, or feelings have become the means of thinking, by very definition of emotions, you're thinking in the past. And for the most part, you're going to keep creating the same life. So then people grab their cell phone, they check their WhatsApp, they check their text, they check their emails, they check Facebook, they take a picture of their feet, they post it on Facebook, they tweet something, they do Instagram, they check the news, and now they feel really connected to everything that's known in their life. And then they go through a series of routine behaviors. They get out of bed on the same side, they go to the toilet, they get a cup of coffee, they take a shower, they get dressed, they drive to work the same way, they do the same things, they see the same people, they push the same emotional buttons, and that becomes the routine, and it becomes like a program. So now they've lost their free will to a program, and there's no unseen hand doing it to them. So when it comes time to change, the redundancy of that cycle becomes a subconscious program. So now 95% of who we are by the time we're 35 years old is a memorized set of behaviors, emotional reactions, unconscious habits, hardwired attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions that function like a computer program. So then a person can say with their 5% of their conscious mind, I want to be healthy, I want to be happy, I want to be free. But the body's on a whole different program. So then how do you begin to make those changes? Well, you have to get beyond the analytical mind, because what separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. And that's where meditation comes in, because you can teach people through practice how to change their brainwaves, slow them down. And when they do that properly, they do enter the operating system where they can begin to make some really important changes.
And now here's our interview with Dr. Gebel.
Gebel became a student on the universal Sufi path of Inayat Khan, who lectured on the subject of mastery through accomplishment. And from the teachings of Inayat Khan comes the following quote: "There are no fixed rules to follow on this path. For every person, there is a special rule. But there is one law which applies to everything in life: sincerity, which is the only thing that is asked by a teacher of his pupil. For truth is not a portion of the insincere." We go into this all with Dr. Gebel.
Thank you for joining us here on Nameless.
My pleasure.
In the research for our show, The Nameless, we're trying to bridge mysticism as it has been known in the past, which is really, as we know, is a science.
Do you know about my second book? The second book is called Nature's Hidden Dimension,
Right.
Exploring the Inner Life of the Universe. That's about looking into harmony between science and mysticism. Seeing that science is well suited to explore all the phenomena of the outer life, but not so much of the inner life. Mm-hmm. But mystics are well trained to explore the mysteries of the inner life. So how can these two be brought together? The understanding of mystics from their discipline and the understanding of scientists from their discipline.
So I think it's fascinating that you're blending science and mysticism, which is really what the mission of our show is to enliven people's divine spark within through science as a means into to the people that aren't open to the spirituality yet, but know that there's something greater and beyond them. And science is an in for a lot of that. So that's why we at Nameless put science and mysticism together. And I'm so glad you even wrote a book. Good God, thank you already. We're gonna have to get that one now. What I want to ask you is your personal journey of how you went from an astrophysicist. Am I to understand that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You went from an astrophysicist into counseling. Can you explain those steps and your personal experience and journey of how that evolved?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. My grandfather was an atheist. My father was an agnostic engineer, very encouraging me to follow a career in science. I think my early interest was in science fiction. This gave me the focus on cosmology, trying to understand the universe, the larger picture. I was fascinated by astrophysics, but the whole academic scene I didn't really feel very hopeful about it. I feel motivated to publish and I was still interested in astrophysics and cosmology, but I began to realize that cosmology, at that time, this was a long time ago, cosmology was really a kind of baby science, and a lot of it was speculation. And since then, it's really blossomed. We're kind of in a golden age of cosmology. But that psychological crisis that I went through and had some psychotherapy resulted in a breakthrough for me where I felt like I came out of my shell. And I don't know, I discovered something kind of intangible that gave me the feeling that I could be happy doing anything. Something alive in my inner life that was more meaningful than what my career might be. And I decided at that time that I would seek my career elsewhere. It was kind of a drastic decision.
Yeah, considering the investment of time and energy.
Right.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I had this psychological breakthrough in a Gestalt therapy workshop. It was the kind of workshop, it was a group workshop, a lot of people on Long Island, and the leaders of the workshop deliberately kept us up all night to kind of break down our resistance, and did this exercise where we were in partners. And it was an exercise in getting to know your senses. It's kind of blindfolded, and then you were led by your partner around, and the partner was reaching your hands to touch various things in nature. We were out in the backyard on a sunny, warm day. Well, first of all, it was his turn, and I saw him kind of waking up to this sensual experience. Something opened up in him, and that was very inspiring to me. And then when it was my turn, he was having me touch the grass and the trees, and at one point he was reaching my arms up, and I thought I was reaching up for something, and I kept looking for what it was, and then suddenly I realized it was the sun. Reaching my hands up to the sun, and I had this just transformational experience of something opened up in that moment. When that opened up, I felt as though I needed to find a spiritual path of some sort. I didn't know what it might be. I've been going to this Sufi group. I discovered it. There was a notice up in the laundromat, and that's how I found out about it. I went there to their meeting, and the moment I stepped through the door, I felt like this is my spiritual family. It was...
You found your tribe?
Pardon?
The first time I went to a Sufi retreat with Jahanara, I don't know if you know Wendy Tremaine, Jahanara.
Yeah.
It was like finding my tribe.
My tribe, yeah.
Yeah, it was just like, the zikr, remember to remember. It was just so, oh yeah, okay, yeah. Like it felt like home more than any other. I too searched for a long time for anything that felt.
Similar feeling, yeah.
Yeah, and Sufism was the freedom for me.
Those moments are very poignant, very interesting.
Yes, powerful. Yes, well, for me, I don't know, it was some sort of inner feeling, I guess. When I stepped in the room, I saw the people, identified with them right away. Well, it wasn't a particular, seeing any. I think what it was they seemed like me. I don't know. They were very straightforward. They weren't wearing Eastern clothes. They weren't using a lot of Eastern words. They were just very available, ordinary, regular people. And yet there was something of the heart there. I just felt a warmth, friendliness, openness, no presumptions. Just like I don't know, it just felt very real. Right. Like spirituality could be something without any trappings of some other culture. It could just be everyday life.
Right.
Just be.
Right, just be. Yeah, just be. Stop trying to be something. Just be.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your book. The
Want to talk about the new one or the old one?
Yeah.
They're both relevant.
Right.
What do you want to talk about?
What do you want to talk about?
Maybe we should look at the new one before we talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, let's look at that one.
Yeah. So Root Speaks to Bud.
That's the first one.
Right. What was the impetus of that?
The impetus. Okay. Yeah. So there are many topics in the teachings of Hazrat Inayat Khan, and one of them is covered in a book that's called Mastery Through Accomplishment. So I was studying that book for some time and found it very interesting and inspiring. So I had this idea, this inspiration to make a movie, just a kind of vague idea in my head. And I was going off to a meeting in Holland, the Netherlands. And I thought, well, I'll bring along my camera and I'll start taking some movie footage. But I forgot my camera. So I got there and I thought, well, maybe this project isn't going to work out after all. But I mentioned it to someone from the Sufi movement who was living there. And she said, oh, use my camera. So I used her camera and I took some footage and was off to a good start. And I got back to America and I discovered that the film standard in Europe and the film standard in America are different. So then my temptation was to say, oh, well, maybe I should give up. But then I found out that there was a place in Chicago that could to the right format. So then I started thinking about mastery through accomplishment and how obstacles come up in life. And there's always a way through if you persist and if you trust and you kind of consult your guidance and not just try to figure it out with your mind. So I was actually beginning to put these teachings into practice. And throughout this project of making this film, one obstacle after another came up. And I kept applying these teachings about mastery. And what I found was that there was a point where I started looking at obstacles differently. At first, obstacles seemed like a hill to climb over. It seemed like frustration to deal with. And then at some point, after getting through many obstacles and feeling kind of the elation of overcoming an obstacle, I began to look at obstacles as something that I welcomed, that then I would have another chance for this feeling of victory, of overcoming, of elation. To expect obstacles in life and to feel the pleasure of dealing with them, working through them, and the confidence, the hope, the trust that there's a way through. I began to feel what he meant by mastery. If the project is sincere, if it comes from a deep place, if there's a real wish to accomplish it, then a way will be found.
How does that work with your mind? In other words, how do you develop I want to make a film? Mm-hmm. That's your mental and maybe your heartfelt thought. I think this may work. So then, to me, I think our listeners would be interested in those steps that you promulgated based on the mastery of accomplishment.
Yes. So there's some key teachings here. So one of them is behind every human desire is a divine desire, a divine wish. So this is an exercise in faith and trust that my wish, if it's a deep, sincere wish that's coming from my heart, that behind it is a divine wish. My wish is an outer expression of God's wish. So God wishes for this. The universe is behind us. The universe is with us to help this happen. So the first step then, besides entertaining that thought, that empowering thought, to become acquainted with your inner guidance. So this inner guidance, it's something more reliable than the planning of the mind. So, I want to make a film, and then my mind gets busy and it says, okay, what do I need to do to make a film? And it starts planning out, well, I need to have a camera, and I need to have a subject, and I need to start thinking about, how it goes from the beginning and then develops and comes to the end. So all those things are the busyness of the mind, but the mind is limited, and there's a better source of guidance, which is, you could call it the intuition. Well, and there's a process. It's not the only process, but it's one that's worked for me, and I found that other people can learn it. First of all, to formulate a question. I have the idea of doing a film. Question is, what's the meaning of this film? What do I really want to express in this film? To get a clear idea of that. I formulate the question, and then immediately the mind will jump in and say, oh, well, okay, you want to know the meaning? And it has, maybe 5 different things. It says, oh, the meaning is this, the meaning is that. So the first thing is to clear away all of that. Say, okay, that's fine, mind. Let's just put that aside and just be blank and be in suspense, not know what the meaning is. Endure that unknowing for a while, which is difficult for the mind. The mind is eager to fill in the empty space, but you deliberately make yourself blank and leave the mind's ideas in reserve. You don't have to reject them, but you just put them aside, discount them for the moment, and then be blank and hold that question in mind. What meaning do I want to have in this film? And not know what the answer is, but just be relaxed, open, and see what impressions come. So the impressions may come in different ways to different people. You might get an image. You might get a dreamlike response. You start to dream. Images form in your mind. You might get a sound. You might get words. You might get a color. You might get a feeling. Just pay attention to whatever arises, even if it seems totally unrelated to your question. So you think, what meaning do I want to have in the film? And this gold color comes up. What does that mean? So, but you don't worry about what it means. You stay with it. You stay with whatever that impression is, like as you would stay with a dream. Maybe you get an image, a dream image, and when you stay with it, that image develops. Something happens. There's movement. There's some progress of that image, or some progress of a color, or some progress of a music, or a word, or something. So you give it space to develop, and when you feel that it's had that space, that it's kind of said what it needs to say to you, then pay attention to the feeling that you get from that. It may be, I don't know, it might be a feeling of peace. It might be a feeling of excitement. It might be a feeling of elation. It might be a feeling of wonder. Whatever the feeling is, just give the feeling some space to be present. Then, at that point, you can engage your mind and ask your mind, analyze this for me. What does this mean? Interpret this for me. And then, so assuming that something has come, some impression has come, and then you have some beginnings of an interpretation of it, some understanding of it. At that point, 2 things. One is to be thankful, to thank this guidance that has given you this gift of an impression, of a response to your question. So thankfulness, a moment of thankfulness to appreciate whatever has been given to you. And the second thing is a moment of commitment. The word of the night, I will, making a commitment. I will follow through. I've received this guidance. It's telling me something, maybe about my film. I will follow this guidance. I will take it seriously, and I will act on it. So making a commitment, not just to say, oh, well, that's interesting, but to say, yes, I will do something with this. And these 2 things, being thankful and committing yourself to following through, that is what strengthens this experience of guidance. So the next time you do it, it will come more easily.
Right. So like in neurology, you're creating neuropaths. You're rewriting pruning neuropaths, creating new ways for your brain to engage in a different thought pattern.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I remember sitting on the side of my bed. I think your suggestion was start with 5 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever you got, because we're in this outer world. We're running around crazy, trying to do something that brings us happiness, whatever it is we're doing, satisfaction, and then but give a little light. Just give it some time. I like to think that we're just apply the same rules that you applied to getting your PhD in astrophysics to the inner life. In other words, we're humans. We have these brains that interpret the mind, etc. So I just felt that was to me, it was like, wow, I just start here? It seems so innocuous. I want to make a film on an icon. Okay, I'll go with them, right? So I just wanted to physically set that up. In other words, I think people, well, what am I doing this? Am I driving to work when I'm doing it? They're trying to squeeze in the inner life into the middle of everything. So
yeah.
I hope that people will give themselves to honor it. Like what you were saying, thank you. But that means you're honoring that time that you set aside or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, initially the inner world might seem fleeting, we have some doubts about it. There's the scientific view is that the inner world is subjective and, fantasizing, and we don't need to pay much attention to it. So this is a different approach, that the inner world is
a little different,
something precious and is a gift, and it's deserving of some time and some setting aside the busyness to pay attention to it.
Right.
And ultimately, you'll be busy enough as your mind has to take over and you have to accomplish, remember the camera. You have to do these other things.
Right.
Yeah. And as you're doing things, as I said, obstacles come up. And when the obstacles come up, then you have that resource of the guidance. I can go back to my guidance and say, here's this obstacle. What can I do about it? And instead of trying to figure it out with your mind, do this, do that, just be open to that intuition, the impression that comes, which might surprise you. It might be something that you never would have thought of with your mind.
I always take that as a gift. The obstacle as a real gift. Is like, oh, I never thought. Well, that's not going to work. Then then you have to sit. But if you see it, you honor it.
That's right. The obstacle may be teaching you something.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Gebel, whose books are available through Omega Press. Jack Kerouac, Pop, trying to study sutras, the kitten, on my page, demanding affection.
And here is If Not Now, When? Conversations with Alice Wyatt.
Today, I hugged a tree. There's a name for people who are weird like that. They are aptly called tree huggers. I was not one of those people until today. I am striding through the nearby Gila National Forest, trying to escape mental turbulence and seething anger by moving my body quickly and confidently through a wild place. Up and over logs, 1, 2, 3 steps, through the creek serpentining 7, 8, then 9 times across my path. My feet are sure, steady, though my focus is not on flowers or raucous crows or even adorable chipmunks. My focus is only to escape, the physical outpacing the mental, if such a thing is possible. Then, a huge ponderosa pine tree hits me. I suppose I hit it, as I am the interloper in this scenario. Ouch! My feet slow for the first time in 45 minutes, and rubbing my offended shoulder, I crane my neck to gaze up at this brawny old-growth monster. Sunken black veins create a haphazard pattern deep in the orange bark, like God had gone crazy with a wood-burning tool. The bottom 2 feet of the trunk are scorched from a massive wildfire that went through a decade ago. Its towering height is marred by 3 sets of forks, meaning it has undergone severe trauma 3 different times in its long tree life. Yet here it is, firmly rooted, with the audacity to bump me out of my self-pity stupor. Can a non-sentient creature communicate with humans? I am sure there are many opinions on this subject, but all I know is that this tree says something tender and gentle to me. In response, I put my arms around 1/3 of it, dig my fingers into the fissures of its skin, and hug it so tightly it leaves puzzle piece bark imprints on my cheek. A tear or 2 leaks out, the first salt water released in 24 draining hours. A bit later, I come across a pool off the trail, tucked back into the curve of a smooth granite rock. The stream tumbles off the hillside and fills a pebble-bottomed pool at least 3 feet deep and twice as long, a miracle here in this dry land where even a year-round stream is a rarity. My skinny dipping tendencies kick in, and I strip without hesitation, pretty sure I'm the only human for 2 square miles. Unexpectedly, the growing pile of lacy undergarments exactly matches the dusty rose color of my nail polish. When I discover a small gray and brown toad cautiously eyeing me from a crevice on the far side of the pool, I wonder if he appreciates the sheer sexiness of this. I ooh and ah as I am thigh-deep in water a penguin would happily frolic in. As my body slowly numbs, I rescue 2 caterpillars and a half-drowned cricket from the frigid water. It feels like the first productive thing I have done all day. I contemplate the satisfaction of having a perpetually numb heart. Oh, the joy of not caring what happens or doesn't happen on any given day or in any given relationship. Just go numb. Don't feel. Seems like an escape route to my mental turmoil. Finally, mustering all my courage, I take a deep breath, collapse my knees, and gasp, then ah! When the cold water closes over my shoulders. In that instant, I know a numb heart is not what I really want. I want to hug trees and skinny dip and flirt with amphibians. I want to admire crows and rescue crickets and listen to the voices of trees. I want to continue to grow tall and robust despite adversity and setbacks. So, I sit naked as a jaybird on a smooth, sun-warmed rock in the middle of the forest and write in the notebook I always have tucked in my jacket pocket. The words pour out and, as usual, bring perspective and healing. 30 minutes later, water spots begin to stain my notebook, but they are no longer tears, only the first raindrops from a storm brewing in the mountains. Time to get dressed, head back, and face my troubles. It is nice to know there's a secret place to escape, though, if only for an afternoon.
Now we turn to the dreamer segment of our show, or the inner naut, as we call them. Cosmonauts, astronauts, and now we have an inner naut. He's a perfect example of how sincere intention to help humanity has been aided by regular practice. After a life-changing illness, he began to explore more aspects of himself through meditation. And this has resulted over about 8 years in over 2,500 sessions which have been recorded. During these, he lets go of his personality and opens to how the permeation can be called upon to restore us to our connection with all that is.
Everyone breathes differently. I went into meditation with a sad heart because I realized just how hopeless it is for everyone. As long as a person is an oxygen breather, and everyone is an oxygen breather, they're caught in the synapses of that breath. In other words, the synapses, of course, relate because it's how they're entwined. They relate to that which is spent up in the physical, and it goes back thousands and thousands of years. And I've even noticed that this affects the heart as I come to recognize all the different ways that people breathe. And I hadn't actually realized that I could notice that. In other words, how a person breathes is defined in relationship to their eons of development. The finesse of the breath is different from one to the next. How one breathes and how one feels oneself in terms of one's breath is determinant of how it is that their mind senses function and work. Thus, a person stays caught in eons and eons of mannerisms. One is born into this, and one is affected by the vibrations of the atmosphere that one actually chose. One is trapped because one hearkens back to something that is established and set from a long, long time ago. The breathing is in accordance with that. One finds a similitude with others that are similarly situated. There is a golden rule behind it all. How is it that change happens in the world? What brings about the change in the world? Is it a rising up or a coming through? How does change happen? In other words, which came first, the chicken or the egg? If you don't grasp the golden rule, you will always be off. Always be off. The golden rule is that inner comes into outer. It doesn't go the other direction. So you have what is known as light is coming down and it touches light, but if light comes down and it touches as sound, it gets dumbed down as the plain sound. I hadn't realized just how serious this was until I had to face it in meditation. I'm going to read the meditation. I noticed the disaster in the outer before I went to bed. This caused me to go back to basics. Change happens from inner into outer. Any other way is conceptual mind sense. In other words, reducing something to a low thing. The key to dreaming into a shift is recognizing that when you don't adhere to the golden rule, what develops stays a man-made concept. In the meditation dream, I went back to pulling things down. There was a level of frustration that existed in that because I couldn't bring it all the way through. When caught in the conceptual, instead of it coming all the way through, then I'm stuck as an oxygen breather. Well, I am an oxygen breather, even if I did seem to think that I pulled it all the way through. But really, if I didn't quite get it because it's from the top, the inner, that space up above, but coming all the way through that whole cycle of breath. Anyway, we're not dealing with that anymore. It starts with the damage of where the concept gets in the way of a process. It happens more than a person realizes. It happens when a person fails to honor the golden rule, which is change happens from inner to outer. The silver rule, if you wanted to call it that, is trying to understand it the other way around. We are within manifestation, rising up, and adhering to things like sound, which is meant to be something that is disseminated for catalytic purposes. It's not something that's just trying to do its own piece as the action. You've got to be careful that you disseminate it on a high enough vibration or quality as light coming down to touch light, not disseminating it as sound or music or something, because that doesn't go anywhere. That has a wonderful lilt about it for a short period of time. It's not something that's going to shift anything. So, unfortunately, change is weird because it seems almost impossible to break free of conceptual vibrations. Conceptual vibrations interfere with the process of inner into outer by trying to see this in a different way. Like I was feeling as an attorney who's trying to suss things out in terms of all the combinations of variables. You know, music works kind of subjectively. You could work objectively like this too, which is an abuse and misuse of the bringing down of energy of the inner into the outer. All of that is disastrous. I have been shown that over and over again. Others who are more stuck basically have the synaptic impressions developed over eons. There was more adhered in that a limitation, Tariqa limitation, a mannerism. It's ancient. I don't know how you would say that. In other words, each one breathes a particular way. They don't realize each breath, each person is breathing differently than another. And if you have people that are in a similitude, you all tend to breathe the same. And so then the synaptic impressions that develop over eons crop up over and over again. You know, the actual soul is a true empty space. I had a lot of images after this. 3 different images went into that. I don't know if I'll get to that, but the most common vacillation is man thinking he can climb to the top. And what I mean by that is to seek to effectuate change from the bottom up. That is not how it works, the rising up. God is a letting go. You have to let go. You don't get caught in being invigorated by the pent-up vibrations. In other words, a subrogation kind of inner into outer. Suffocating the light took words into sound in order to quicken flesh. This is a misuse and misdirection that ends in disaster. I had the following image in the meditation dream that tuned in the process. First, there was the frustration of not quite getting the inner to touch the outer. This was an exhausting condition. This was complicated, as an image that looked almost in a dream within the meditation, by an action in which things were incomplete in terms of how the action works. In other words, life is like that. Just one great big supply. The usual system for this auction has been set aside. Something else had come up in how this was unfolding. Normally, an auction in life in which you're trying to put together the pieces, where you're trying to complete things in a sense of how inner comes into outer, as an auction has dense imagery. First, you would have a person who would bid through a gesture because it was incomplete, and each person would have to outshout the other. But ordinarily, instead of trying to do that with sound, the gesture is pre-registered into a bidder number. The bidder number corresponds to an established science. It's a man-made image to connect to the inner and not speed up when one uses impulses, then falsely feel good in a lesser self way. So, I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe how I get it. How did I get? What did I get out of all of that, and even how to write it up? So in this auction in life, whatever comes up requires impulses to speed up, you know? It's because of having spent some time trying to do the inner into the outer, and then I feel like it comes off the synapses. I mean, maybe another way of describing this, if you're talking to someone and all of a sudden something speeds up or something quickens, my senses jump into those synapses, and it feels good to jump in and act like you fit that way. But it's a complete waste of time. You become overwhelmed with what that way of being. It's like the chicken and egg story. Which comes first? To not understand the principle of inner and outer as the first truth is to spend eons going in circles. Such a misdirection bastardizes the self. I think I will try some of these images, just to show how it looks in the outer as opposed to the meditation dream. I had 3 sleep dreams portraying the way things were pent up in afflictions that haven't gone away and affect the environment I'm in. Most people fail to realize how they're affected by something other than themselves, meaning these ancient responses or hauntings. To not understand the principle of inner and outer as the first truth is to spend eons going in circles. The first image is of an old man who's going around with 4 boxes he feels are important. I decide it's time to break the boxes down, see what the contents are. The guy was carrying and holding on to empty boxes. I mean, what a waste of time, right? In the next dream, I go downstairs, and there are all kinds of little things like bugs, creepy crawlers I'd never seen before on the floor. At first, I just glance at them. The more I look at them, the more varied they seem. Some are furry and shift appearances. Some can jump. They seem benign and harmless enough, just playing in the atmosphere that won't go away. Other than themselves, like I said, they're benign. But the sum total drains my intertwined connection to the overall awareness of something outside. Somehow, they grab your breath and they mess with how you breathe, and it's caught in a sick synaptic way. Anyways, it's kind of hard to describe. In the next dream, I'm in a room in which I'm in the center of this huge auditorium. And there is a person that I know who goes past me. Someone I have a relationship with, because apparently I would then try to go to where he went, over by the side of the wall. I hadn't noticed from the center because I hadn't gotten close. There are things that he's keeping over there as if important. And this guy also has a younger helper who pulls out of a satchel large posters, and they're all meaningful. And the one that I remember was one that had all kinds of kids' names on it from long ago. Where are they now in the unfoldment process? I turned to my friend, who now, to my surprise, I realize is still caught up by the antics of something that I thought I had changed. I'd seen this slowly taken away from him, and then I'd seen him vacillate back into it, and then vacillate out. I'm shocked to learn he's 81. I wonder, is that what I might have to look forward to? I'm feeling stunned. The meaning of these dreams is, in manifestation, I was shown that a person doesn't change as quickly as I thought. And in the meditation, I was shown that bringing inner into outer is practically impossible. And I explained why it is. You could also develop the perception, seeing how it is that a person breathes. You can see the wear and tear of the vibrations on the soul of life. Yet, that is what needs to happen for there to be a shift. You have to bring inner into outer. You have to do it. Do you want to play with it in a really dense way, or do you want to try to speed it up as an inner into outer? When you do that, how do you communicate it all the way through? Because it has to be inner into outer, and in-breath and out-breath have to be one, they can't be distinguishable from each other in terms of their biases and mannerisms. They have to learn to work together, and they have to know themselves. It has to be known that which comes into the world comes in through the out-breath. That which gets disseminated and spread out into the overallness is with the in-breath. But when the in-breath gets into a piece of the action density and thinks that it's going to have to direct or shape something on its own, then it's not dissemination. Then it's just playing with the lilting energy that's a disaster. Anyway, it's kind of hard to describe, especially when getting it requires a person to recognize that they have to know where the spells are on the breath. Who's aware of their breathing, let alone how things circulate through the body? Who is aware of all this stuff? As I go through this, I get afflicted more and more in terms of the density of things. My body is becoming more acutely attuned to my hiccups. Why? No wonder, anyway. It is what it is. Can't complain.
Happy holidays from the Nameless team. Our next episode will be coming out January 20th, 2022. We will be exploring the art of personality and asking the question, how do we, human beings, make us into living art?
In our prep work for the Nameless show, we have come across some provocative quotes. We have culled 365 of these from our work with quantum mechanics, mysticism, and alchemy to post on our Twitter feed, Daily Dervish. Dervishes are infamous for saying or doing something disruptive to the collective amnesia. Get your daily disruption on twitter.com by subscribing to Daily Dervish.
If you have enjoyed this episode, please be sure to tap the subscribe button on your favorite platform to follow us for new episodes every other week. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. For a transcript in Spanish, English, Hindi, or other languages, please go to thenamelessshow.com and email your questions to thenamelessshow@gmail.com. Time is precious in this dimension. Thank you for spending some of yours with us. None of this would be possible without our dedicated team of lightworkers. Cheryl Ray, Carol B., David Clare, Yoselin Riojas, and Rain Jubilee. Voiceover acting talent for Listening In segment by Yasna Brown, Teresa Langston, or John Bellimer. The theme sound for Nameless was created by Rob Carey at Cosmic Turtle Sound Studios, Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Additional sound beds created by Paul Lee, Rob Carey, Rory Morella, AJ Pantaleo, and Dan Gallagher. The Nameless Show, copyright 2021 under Sophia Unity Foundation. Wisdom is one.